Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how to take a recipe for 50 baked potatoes and calculate the cost per portion for producing one baked potato. Now, we have a box highlighted in red to the left of the screen which shows you a very simple recipe for producing 50 baked potatoes, and it only has 4 ingredients. Now let's say that you wanted to make those 50 baked potatoes. You would need to go to the supermarket, or you would need to go to your supplier or vendor and order the ingredients in order to make those 50 baked potatoes. If you go to the store or if you go to your vendor, you may not be able to purchase the exact quantity that you need for your recipe. You may need to purchase a little bit more because perhaps it is packaged in larger quantities. But that doesn't matter. Even if you end up purchasing a lot more than what your recipe requires, we can still go ahead and figure out how much it would cost you to produce one baked potato using a tool called a cost card, which is the table that is listed right over here. Now, before you're able to break down the cost of a recipe, the first thing that you should really do is to convert your units of measure so that the unit of measures in your recipe on the left are comparable to the units of measure on the right. And my recommendation is to always convert any weights that you have that are in pounds into ounces. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to convert the pounds that we have located over here into ounces, and the formula for converting pounds into ounces is simply to multiply each pound by 16. So we're going to do that for the butter. So I pulled up my calculator and we're going to go ahead and do this together. 6 times 16 equals 96 ounces. So I'm going to go ahead and write 96 ounces over here for the sour cream. And then we're going to do the same thing for the butter. We have 6 pounds of butter and we're going to multiply that by 16, and that should be the exact same thing, 96 ounces. I don't need to convert the shortening because that's already in ounces. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on the invoice. I'm going to convert the 40 pounds of shortening to ounces. So we're going to go ahead and take 40 times 16, and that should give us 640 ounces. Now we're going to go ahead and convert the sour cream and then later on the butter. Okay, now that we've converted everything into ounces, we're almost ready to start using the cost card. You'll notice that there's a column on the right labeled yield, and the yield indicates the amount of portion that will actually end up being served to the customer. Now that we converted all of our measurements into ounces, the next thing that we'll need to do is to plug in the information that we have. Always begin by putting in the name of the recipe. So we're going to take the name of the recipe and type it in. Baked potato. The next thing that you need to include is the number of portions that this recipe produces. Now this recipe produces 50 baked potatoes. Now we do not know the cost per portion. We need to calculate that. So we're going to leave this blank for now. The next thing that we'll need to do is to go ahead and plug in the information that we have for the recipe over here, and this is the recipe information right here in the red highlighted box. In the first column we've got the amount column, and under the recipe we have 50 baked potatoes, so we will put 50 as the amount. The unit of measure for the baked potatoes could be pieces. The ingredients is simply the name of the item that we are including. Baking potatoes. Alright, we're going to do this for the remaining ingredients. Great. Once we've completed the information required for columns A, B, and C, we can move over to columns D and E. Now you'll notice that columns A, B, and C required information that was strictly from the recipe. Columns D and E requires information from the invoice. The letters AP over here in the cell indicates as purchased. So we're going to take the information directly from the as purchased receipt, which is in the blue box, and plug it into columns D and E. Now the cost of the baking potatoes was $15, so we will put in the price over here. The shortening was $40. We paid $5 for the sour cream and $2 for the butter. Now in column E we need to include the unit, and what we really need to put in here is actually the total amount and the unit that we purchased. So in the first column what we will do is we will put the amount that we purchased, and that is 150 pieces. And then we're going to do the same thing for the remaining items. We purchased 640 ounces of shortening. Next we're going to plug in the yield, 85%. In column G we need to calculate the edible portion cost. The invoice gave us the cost of the baking potatoes before we process them or before we cook them. But according to the yield, we're going to lose about 15% off the baked potato after we basically cook it due to evaporation and processing. So the actual cost of the baking potato is going to be a little bit higher than $15 because 15% of the potato is just going to disappear or is going to get thrown out. So what you need to do here is to calculate the edible portion. And in this cell I actually included a little cheat sheet, a formula for you to calculate the edible portion cost. And that formula is D divided by F, and D is the cost divided by the yield. Now anytime you're dividing by a percentage, you actually need to divide it by a decimal. So 85% is going to be 0.85. So in this cell what I'm going to do is I am going to calculate $15 and I will divide it by 0.85. And that should give me about $17.65. I'm going to round it up here, okay? Now we're going to do the same thing for the other ingredients. So we're going to take the cost divided by the yield to get the EP cost. $40 divided by 0.74, which is 74%. And this is going to give us $54.05. The next item is the sour cream, and that costs us $5, and we're going to divide that by 97%, so that's 0.97, and that is $5.15. The last item is butter for $2, and the yield is 90%, so that is 2 divided by 0.9, and that gives us $2.22. Okay, next what we want to do is we want to go ahead and copy this information over to this column. Actually, we want to copy both of these columns over to this area right here because this does not change. Okay, here we go. Now in column I, we need to calculate the cost for each potato. We know that the edible portion cost for the potatoes for 150 potatoes is $17.65. So we want to calculate the cost of one potato. So the calculation is very simple. You want to basically use a little cheat sheet over here. So it is G divided by H. So we want to divide $17.65 by 150 potatoes to get the cost for each potato. So $17.65 divided by 150 potatoes is about 12 cents. So we're going to go ahead and put 0.12 right there. And let's go ahead and change all of these into dollars. There we go. So that's 12 cents. And the unit is the same. It never changes. In fact, we're just going to go ahead and copy all of these units of measures, and we are going to plug them in over here into that column. And we're going to do the calculation for the shortening now. We know that 640 ounces of shortening is going to cost us $54.05. We want to calculate the cost of 1 ounce of shortening. So the calculation is $50.05 divided by 640 ounces. So each ounce of shortening is going to be about 8 cents. Our next item is the sour cream, and we paid $5.15, and we're going to divide that by 80 ounces. And each ounce is about 6 cents. And our last item is the butter. We paid $2.22 for the butter. Actually, that's the EP cost, not the as purchase cost. Divided by 16, and that's about 14 cents. Now that we've calculated the cost per unit, the cost for each potato and for each ounce of ingredient, it becomes very easy for us to figure out how much 50 potatoes are going to cost us. The formula for that is very simple. You want to take the cost per unit, so the cost of each potato, multiply it by the recipe, which is 50 potatoes, to get the extension cost, which is the recipe cost for the potatoes. So we're going to take 12 cents and multiply it by 50. 50 potatoes times 12 cents is $6. The next item is shortening. We have 4 ounces of shortening, multiply that by 8 cents per ounce, and it cost us 0.32, so 32 cents for all of the shortening that is required. Next, we've got 96 ounces of sour cream, multiply that by 0.6, which is 6 cents, and that gives us $5.76. And our last ingredient is the butter. We need 96 ounces for our recipe, and we're going to multiply that by 14 cents. Now we need to add up all of these extensions at the very bottom. 6 plus 32 plus $5.76 plus $13.44. $25.52. So what this basically tells us is that in order to produce 50 baked potatoes using the recipe in the red box, it's going to cost us $25.52. This is for all 50 baked potatoes once they've been cooked. If I wanted to calculate now the cost per portion, so if I wanted to find out how much would each baked potato cost, all I need to do now is to take the total for 50 and divide it by the portions, and the answer will go over here. So let's go ahead and do this calculation together. So the entire recipe is going to cost me $25.52. I'm going to divide this by 50 to figure out how much each fully cooked baked potato is going to cost, and that is going to be 51 cents. And this is how you complete a cost card. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me during my office hour or speak with me after class.